"I can save him," declares a black cleaning woman, her voice steady amidst chaos as the CEO of a Wall Street empire collapses, his face twitching, hands trembling violently. In the opulent boardroom of a Manhattan financial titan, this 26-year-old immigrant janitor, once a promising medical student, stands firm despite years of enduring cruel taunts, racial slurs, and dismissal as just a maid. Mocked for her African heritage and low-status job, she faces relentless prejudice from executives who underestimate her brilliance. Yet her meticulous observations could alter a tycoon's fate. Will her courage triumph over their scorn? How far will her resolve carry her? Subscribe to our channel for the latest gripping stories and share where you're watching from in the comments. Stay tuned to uncover how one woman's defiance reshapes a legacy of injustice. Don't miss the twists that await. The Manhattan skyline glittered through the towering glass walls of Apex Capital's headquarters, a fortress of wealth and power where ambition pulsed like a heartbeat. In the quiet hum of the 42nd floor, a young woman moved silently, her hands steady as she polished the sleek mahogany desk in the CEO's office. At 26, she was a shadow in this world of tailored suits and sharp deals, her cleaning uniform a stark contrast to the opulence around her. An immigrant from Mali, she carried a past far richer than the executives who barely noticed her. Once a brilliant medical student at a prestigious U.S. university, her dreams of becoming a doctor were shattered by a fabricated scandal. A professor's cold declaration that someone like her didn't belong in medicine. The sting of that betrayal lingered, but she refused to let it define her. The office was a cathedral of success, adorned with awards and photos of a man who commanded it all. Thomas Whitmore, 55, the CEO whose name was synonymous with Apex Capital's dominance. His presence filled the room even before he entered, his voice booming through the glass door as he barked orders into a phone. She paused, her cloth hovering over the desk, as Thomas stormed in, his stride uneven, almost faltering. His left hand trembled faintly, clutching the phone, and his eyes blinked rapidly, as if struggling to focus. To anyone else, it might have been stress, a titan under pressure, but to her trained eye, honed by years of medical study and internships in understaffed clinics back in Mali, these were not mere quirks. They were symptoms, warning signs of a neurological storm brewing beneath his polished exterior. She hesitated, her heart pounding. Speaking out of turn could cost her this job, the only lifeline she had after her academic ruin. But the oath she'd once sworn as a budding caregiver, to protect life, burned stronger than fear. "Sir," she said softly, stepping forward, "I couldn't help but notice you seem unsteady. Your hand, it's trembling, and your eyes are blinking unusually. It might be serious. Have you seen a doctor?" Thomas froze, his phone still pressed to his ear. Slowly he lowered it, his sharp blue eyes narrowing as they fixed on her. The air in the room thickened, charged with his disbelief. "Excuse me?" His voice was a blade cutting through the silence. "A cleaning woman telling me about my health? What do you know about anything beyond a mop and bucket?" His words dripped with disdain, each syllable a reminder of her place in his world. The door swung open, and James Carter, the company's CFO, strode in, catching the tail end of her warning. A smirk curled his lips as he leaned against the desk, his polished demeanor masking a cruel edge. "Maid's giving medical advice now?" James chuckled, deliberately avoiding her name, though it was printed clearly on her badge. "Stick to cleaning, sweetheart. Leave the big thoughts to the professionals." His words sparked laughter from the handful of staff lingering in the hallway, their chuckles echoing like a chorus of dismissal. One junior analyst, a young man in a crisp suit, leaned toward a colleague and whispered, just loud enough to be heard, "She needs to know her place." The phrase landed like a slap, its venom subtle but unmistakable, rooted in the unspoken assumption that her dark skin and immigrant status rendered her intellect invisible. Her face remained composed, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of pain, a wound reopened by years of similar slights. She'd faced this before, classmates who questioned her place in lecture halls, professors who scrutinized her work with skepticism reserved for her alone. The scandal that ended her medical career had been orchestrated with the same quiet malice, a false accusation of tampering with medications, backed by a professor who saw her brilliance as a threat. "People like you don't belong here," he'd said, his words echoing in her mind as she stood in this gleaming office, reduced to a uniform and a role others deemed beneath them. Thomas waved a hand, dismissing her as he resumed his call. "Get back to work," he snapped, his voice heavy with irritation. "And don't interrupt me again." The laughter from the hallway faded as the staff dispersed, leaving her alone with the hum of the vacuum cleaner and the weight of their scorn. She clenched her jaw, her fingers tightening around the cloth. They saw a cleaning woman, an outsider, but they didn't know her. They didn't know the nights she'd spent memorizing anatomy texts by candlelight in Mali, or the patients she'd comforted in crowded clinics. Their gratitude a quiet validation of her skill. They didn't know the fire that still burned in her, undimmed by their contempt. She moved to the corner of the office, her movements deliberate, almost ritualistic. From her apron pocket she pulled a small, worn notebook, its pages filled with neat handwriting. Flipping to a fresh page, she began to write, "Tremors in left hand, intermittent, approx. 2 to 3 seconds. Rapid blinking, asymmetrical, more pronounced on the right side. Unsteady gait, slight stumble on entry. Her pen moved with precision, each word a testament to the knowledge they refused to see. She noted the time, the context, the subtle signs others ignored. Signs that whispered of a neurological condition, one that could be deadly if left unchecked. As she tucked the notebook away, her resolve hardened. Their insults could wound, but they couldn't erase what she knew. The CEO's arrogance, the CFO's mockery, the whispered jabs about her place. None of it could silence the voice inside her, the one that had sworn to save lives, no matter who they belonged to. She wasn't just a cleaning woman. She was a healer, a scientist, a woman who'd clawed her way through adversity and refused to be broken. They could laugh, they could sneer, but she would keep watching, keep writing, keep fighting. Because somewhere in this tower of glass and greed, a life hung in the balance, and she was the only one who saw it. The office lights dimmed as she finished her shift, the city's glow casting long shadows across the floor. She slipped out quietly, her notebook hidden, her heart steady. They thought they'd put her in her place, but they were wrong. Her place was here, in the shadows where she could see what they couldn't, and where she would prove, in time, that courage and competence knew no boundaries, not of job title, not of skin, not of origin. They thought they'd put her in her place, but they were wrong. Her place was here, in the shadows where she could see what they couldn't, and where she would prove, in time, that courage and competence knew no boundaries. As she stepped out into the chilly Manhattan night, the city's restless hum swallowed her footsteps, but her mind was alight with purpose. The notebook in her apron pocket felt heavier than ever, its pages a silent rebellion against the scorn she'd endured. Each symptom she'd recorded was a step toward saving a life, a vow unbroken despite the weight of their disdain. She wasn't just a cleaning woman. She was a keeper of an oath, forged in a past they could never erase. Her journey began far from New York's gleaming towers, in the dusty clinics of Bamako, Mali, where she'd trained as a nurse intern under flickering lights and relentless heat. At 19, she'd memorized medical texts by lamplight, her hands steady as she bandaged wounds or comforted fevered children. Her village had celebrated her, their pride a beacon that carried her to a U.S. medical school on a hard-won scholarship. There she shone, top of her class, her diagnoses sharp, her compassion boundless. But brilliance in a black woman from Africa was a threat to some. A professor, his face taut with prejudice, had watched her rise with growing unease. "A girl like you can't represent modern medicine," he'd sneered, his words a prelude to ruin. When she challenged a grading error, he orchestrated a scandal, accusing her of tampering with lab samples. The evidence was flimsy, but his influence was ironclad. Within months, she was expelled, her dreams shattered, her name smeared. She'd returned to her dorm that night, clutching her textbooks, vowing to rebuild what they'd stolen. Now, years later, in the sterile corridors of Apex Capital, she carried that vow like armor. The 42nd floor buzzed with the morning's frenetic energy, executives darting between meetings, their voices sharp with ambition. She moved among them, invisible yet watchful, her mop gliding across marble floors. Thomas Whitmore's office was her focus, its glass walls framing a man unraveling under pressures he refused to name. She noticed the worsening signs. His speech faltered mid-sentence, a hesitant slur creeping into his words. During a conference call, he fumbled the name of a longtime deputy, calling him that marketing guy, before correcting himself with a forced laugh. His memory was fraying, threads of clarity slipping away. To her, these weren't quirks of a busy CEO. They were red flags, echoes of cases she'd studied in Mali and lecture halls, pointing to a neurological decline that could turn fatal. She lingered near his desk, polishing a frame that didn't need it, her eyes tracking his movements. His right hand, once steady, now hesitated over his pen, as if the act of writing required effort. She knew she had to act, but the memory of Thomas's earlier rebuke stung. Still, her oath, to protect life no matter the cost, demanded she try again. She approached Sarah Mitchell, the head of operations, a woman known for her efficiency and icy professionalism. Sarah stood in the hallway, reviewing reports, her blonde hair pulled tight in a bun. "Ms. Mitchell," she began, her voice measured but firm, "I've noticed concerning symptoms in Mr. Whitmore. Memory lapses, slurred speech. He needs a doctor. It could be serious." Sarah's eyes flicked up, cold and assessing, lingering on her uniform before meeting her gaze. "Don't overstep your role," she said. Her tone clipped, the word role heavy with implication. "Your job is to clean floors, not play doctor." The dismissal was sharp, a blade wrapped in civility, but its edge was unmistakable. A black immigrant had no place in their world of expertise. As Sarah walked away, a group of analysts nearby exchanged glances, one muttering, "Maid Molly's at it again." The nickname, born in whispered corridors, spread like poison, reducing her to a caricature of her heritage and job. Their laughter followed her down the hall, a reminder that her knowledge, her past, meant nothing here. She swallowed the hurt, her face a mask of calm. She'd learned to wear that mask in medical school, when classmates whispered about affirmative action behind her back, or when professors questioned her answers with a scrutiny reserved for her alone. The injustice of her expulsion had taught her resilience, but it hadn't dulled the pain of being unseen. Back in Mali, her community had called her a healer, their trust a balm for every sleepless night. Here she was Maid Molly, a label that mocked her roots and erased her expertise. Yet she refused to let their prejudice define her. Every insult only sharpened her resolve, a fire stoked by the memory of patients who'd looked to her for hope. In the quiet of the supply closet, she opened her notebook, its pages a growing record of Thomas's decline. Memory lapse, misidentified deputy, 10:15 a.m. Speech, slurring on multisyllable words, intermittent. Fine motor difficulty, pen grip unsteady, 10:30 a.m. Her handwriting was meticulous, each entry a defiance of their dismissal. She wasn't just documenting symptoms, she was honoring the oath she'd taken years ago, in a dusty clinic, surrounded by people who believed in her. That oath to save lives regardless of who they belonged to was her anchor. Thomas might see her as a nobody, Sarah as a nuisance. But she knew the truth. A life was at stake, and she was the only one paying attention. As she closed the notebook, the weight of their scorn settled over her, but so did her determination. They could call her Maid Molly, they could sneer at her origins, but they couldn't erase what she knew. She'd faced worse. Professors who dismantled her future, systems that saw her skin before her skill. Yet she'd survived, carrying her knowledge like a torch through the darkness. Thomas's life hung in the balance, and she would not let his arrogance or their prejudice stop her. She slipped the notebook back into her pocket, her heart steady, her purpose clear. The fight was just beginning, and she was ready. The fight was just beginning, and she was ready. Tucking her notebook into her apron, she stepped out of Apex Capital's sterile supply closet, her resolve a quiet fire against the chill of dismissal. The executive's sneers and the venomous nickname, Maid Molly, echoed in her mind, but they couldn't dim the clarity of her purpose. She was a healer, bound by an oath that transcended their prejudice, and she would not falter. On a crisp Sunday morning, as Harlem's streets stirred with life, she found herself in the pews of a small church, its stained glass windows casting warm light over the congregation. Here, far from the glass towers of Manhattan, she sought solace, a moment to gather strength for the battle ahead. The service was nearing its end when a frail, elderly woman in the pew ahead stumbled, her cane slipping as she tried to stand. Instinct took over. She knelt swiftly, her hands steady as she supported the woman's trembling frame, her voice calm and reassuring. "Easy now, ma'am, I've got you," she said, guiding her back to the seat. Her movements were precise, practiced, a relic of her days as a nurse intern in Molly's crowded clinics. The congregation murmured in approval, but one pair of eyes lingered longer. A woman in her 60s, her silver hair pulled back, her gaze sharp with recognition. As the service ended, she approached, her presence commanding yet warm. "You've got a nurse's touch," she said, her voice rich with certainty. "I'm Patricia Johnson, retired neurologist. You're no ordinary cleaner." Her heart skipped. For the first time since her expulsion from medical school, someone saw her. Not the uniform, not the caricature, but the healer beneath. Hesitant, she introduced herself, her words cautious but honest. "I was a medical student, training to be a nurse back home in Mali, but things didn't work out." Patricia's eyes softened, a knowing look that spoke of shared struggles. Over coffee at a nearby diner, she shared her story. Patricia had been a trailblazer, one of the first black women to practice neurology in a field dominated by white men. "They called me the black nurse behind my back," she said, her voice steady but laced with old pain. "Never doctor, always nurse, as if my degree meant nothing. I fought that prejudice every day." The words struck deep, mirroring her battles. The professor who'd branded her unfit, the colleagues who'd whispered "Maid Molly." Patricia understood, and that understanding forged an instant bond. Emboldened, she opened her notebook, its pages dense with meticulous entries. Thomas Whitmore's slurred speech, his memory lapses, his unsteady hands. She described the moments she'd witnessed, his confusion over names, his faltering grip on a pen, the subtle signs others dismissed as stress. Patricia leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the notes. "These aren't random," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Slurring, memory issues, motor difficulties. They point to something serious. A brain hemorrhage, maybe, or a tumor. Left untreated, it's a death sentence." Her words were a validation, a lifeline in a world that had tried to silence her. Together they devised a plan, an anonymous letter to Thomas's wife, Margaret, a former nurse who might recognize the urgency of the symptoms. "She'll understand the language," Patricia said, "but we need to be precise, undeniable." Back in her small apartment, she worked late into the night, her pen moving with surgical precision. The letter grew to 47 pages, a clinical masterpiece detailing every symptom she'd observed, timestamps, behaviors, patterns of deterioration. 11:02 a.m., misidentified deputy as marketing guy. 2:15 p.m., slurred speech on strategic, paused mid-sentence. 3:30 p.m., pen dropped twice, right hand unsteady. Each entry was a testament to her training, a defiance of the voices that called her Maid Molly. She wrote not for recognition, but for the life hanging in the balance, driven by the oath she'd sworn years ago. Patricia reviewed the draft, nodding with professional approval. "This is airtight," she said. "No one can ignore this. Not if they care about him." But doubt gnawed at her. Would Margaret, a woman of privilege, take seriously a letter from an anonymous source? Would she even read it, knowing it came from a cleaning woman? The risk was immense. Exposure could cost her job, her fragile foothold in the city. Yet she sealed the envelope, her hands steady, her resolve unbroken. At Apex Capital, the air was thick with tension. She moved through her rounds, her eyes sharp as she watched Thomas. His condition was worsening. He snapped at a junior executive, forgetting their name entirely, his voice stumbling over simple words. During a break, she overheard two analysts in the break room, their voices low but cutting. "Saw her talking to some old lady in Harlem," one said, smirking. What do they think they are, doctors? The other laughed, mimicking her accent. Maid Molly and her friend, solving brain mysteries. The words stung, their mockery a reminder of the invisible barrier she faced. Her African roots, her job, her skin, all weaponized to dismiss her. Patricia's own story echoed in her mind. I was never one of them, Patricia had said, recounting how colleagues had questioned her diagnoses, attributing her success to diversity quotas rather than skill. The parallels were stark. Two black women, their expertise buried under prejudice, their voices drowned out by those who saw only their surface. Yet Patricia's strength fueled her own. She slipped the letter into an unmarked envelope, arranging for a courier to deliver it to Margaret's home. As the courier vanished into the city, a weight lifted, but a new fear settled in. What if Margaret dismissed it? What if the letter was traced back to her, a cleaning woman daring to speak out of turn? The stakes were higher now, the line between courage and ruin razor thin. In the quiet of the church that evening, she sat alone, the stained glass light casting patterns on her hands. The letter was sent, a beacon of hope in a sea of doubt. But as she clutched her notebook, her heart wavered. She'd poured her expertise, her pain, her oath into those 47 pages. Would they be enough to pierce the veil of arrogance and prejudice surrounding Thomas Whitmore? Or would her voice once again be silenced by those who saw her as nothing more than a shadow in their world? Would her voice once again be silenced by those who saw her as nothing more than a shadow in their world? In the quiet of the Harlem church, she clutched her notebook, its pages heavy with the truth she'd poured into a 47-page letter. She'd sent it into the unknown, a desperate plea to save a life that others refused to see was slipping away. The uncertainty gnawed at her, but as she stepped into the dawn light of Manhattan, a flicker of hope stirred. If Margaret, Thomas Whitmore's wife, read those pages, her training as a former nurse might pierce the veil of arrogance surrounding the CEO. The city's pulse quickened around her, but her own heart beat with a singular focus: to honor the oath that defined her, no matter the cost. At the Whitmore family's Upper East Side townhouse, Margaret sat in her study, the anonymous letter spread across her desk. Its clinical precision struck her. Timestamps, symptoms, behavioral shifts, all laid out with chilling clarity. Slurred speech, memory lapses, unsteady hands. These were not the signs of stress, but of something far graver. As a former nurse, she recognized the shadow of a neurological crisis, perhaps a hemorrhage or tumor, lurking in the details. She'd noticed changes in Thomas herself, his irritability sharper, his focus fraying, but his dismissals had silenced her concerns. Now this letter, from someone who'd watched him closely, reignited her fear. She confronted him that evening, her voice steady but urgent. Thomas, you're not yourself. The confusion, the tremors. This letter says you need a doctor. Now. Thomas, lounging in his study, scoffed, tossing the letter aside without a glance. Advice from some nobody? He snapped, his voice thick with disdain. I don't need an invisible busybody telling me how to live. The word invisible cut deep, a dismissal not just of the letter's author, but of anyone beneath his notice. Margaret pressed, but his glare silenced her. Their daughter Jessica, a medical student in her final year, hovered nearby, her brow furrowed. She'd seen her father stumble over words at dinner, forget familiar names, but his towering presence made her hesitate. Dad, maybe we should at least check, she ventured softly. Thomas's eyes flashed. I built this empire. I know my own body, he growled, ending the conversation. The next morning, the 42nd floor of Apex Capital buzzed with the tension of a high-stakes strategy meeting. Thomas stood at the head of the conference table, his tailored suit masking the subtle tremors in his left hand. She moved quietly along the room's edges, her cleaning cart a shield as she observed him. His voice, usually commanding, faltered as he misnamed a director, calling the head of finance that operations guy. The room stilled, executives exchanging uneasy glances. Thomas laughed it off, but his words slurred on profitability, a brief, jarring pause that only she caught. When a junior executive cautiously asked, Sir, are you feeling all right? Thomas slammed his fist on the table, His face flushed. "I'm fine," he roared, his left hand trembling visibly. "Stop wasting my time with your nonsense." His eyes, unfocused for a fleeting moment, betrayed a deeper struggle. She jotted the details in her notebook, hidden behind her cart. 10:47 a.m., misnamed finance director. 10:50 a.m., slurred speech, profitability. Left hand tremor, pronounced during outbursts. Her pen moved with the precision of a clinician, each entry a lifeline for a man too proud to save himself. She knew she had to reach Margaret directly. Thomas's dismissal of the letter meant time was running out. During a break, she spotted Margaret visiting the office, a rare occurrence. Heart pounding, she approached, her voice low but firm. "Mrs. Whitmore, I wrote the letter. Your husband's symptoms are worsening. He needs help." Before Margaret could respond, James Carter, the CFO, stepped between them, his smile cold. "You're crossing a line," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Go back to your floors." The word line was a wall, a reminder that her place was not among decision makers. Margaret hesitated, her eyes flickering with doubt, then turned away. As she retreated, a director nearby muttered to a colleague, "She thinks reading a few medical books makes her important." The words, sharp and dismissive, carried the weight of assumption. Her knowledge, her urgency, meant nothing because of her role, her skin, her origins. The nickname Maid slithered through the office, whispered in break rooms and hallways, a cruel shorthand for her audacity to speak beyond her station. She'd faced this before. Classmates who'd doubted her intellect, a professor who'd seen her as a threat to his world. But the sting was fresh, a reminder of how her expertise was buried under their prejudice. Yet she refused to waver. Thomas's life was at stake, and her oath to protect, to heal, burned brighter than their scorn. Back in her apartment, she replayed the encounter, the doubt in Margaret's eyes haunting her. She needed an ally, someone to amplify her voice. Patricia Johnson's face came to mind, the retired neurologist who'd seen her for who she was. She dialed Patricia's number, her voice steady despite the weight of the day. Margaret saw the letter, but Thomas dismissed it. "He's getting worse. Today he couldn't focus, and his hands shook more. I tried to talk to her, but they shut me down." Patricia's response was immediate, her tone resolute. "We can't stop now. I'll reach out to Margaret myself, doctor to nurse. She'll listen." The plan was a lifeline, a chance to break through the wall of arrogance and bias. But as she hung up, a knot of fear tightened. Time was slipping away, and Thomas's condition was a ticking clock. She sat at her small table, her notebook open, its pages a testament to her vigilance. The executives saw a cleaning woman, a nobody, but she was more. A healer, a scientist, a woman who'd sworn to save lives, even those who despised her. The weight of their dismissal pressed down, but so did her determination. Patricia's support was a spark, but the outcome rested on Margaret's willingness to act. As she stared at the city lights beyond her window, she knew the fight was far from over. Time was running out, and she needed to lean on Patricia's expertise to push Margaret to act before it was too late. Time was running out, and she needed to lean on Patricia's expertise to push Margaret to act before it was too late. As she stared at the city lights from her apartment window, the weight of her mission pressed against her heart, but so did a spark of hope. Patricia's promise to reach Margaret directly, doctor to nurse, was a lifeline in a battle against arrogance and prejudice. The notebook in her hands, its 47 pages a testament to her vigilance, held the truth that could save a life, if only it could break through the walls of dismissal. The next morning, as she pushed her cleaning cart through Apex Capital's gleaming halls, a new resolve steadied her. She was no longer alone, and the fight for Thomas Whitmore's life was reaching its breaking point. At the Whitmore family's Upper East Side mansion, Margaret paced the oak-paneled study, her fingers tracing the edges of the anonymous letter. Patricia Johnson's call had come late the previous night, her voice calm but urgent. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm a retired neurologist. The letter you received is accurate. Your husband's symptoms suggest a brain hemorrhage or worse. He needs immediate evaluation." Margaret's nursing training kicked in, her mind racing through the signs she'd ignored. Thomas's irritability, his faltering memory, his unsteady hands. She'd tried to confront him, but his pride had shut her down. Now, with Patricia's warning echoing, she devised a plan. She invited Apex Capital's board to a supposed succession planning meeting at their home, a ruse to stage a medical intervention. The stakes were clear. Thomas's life and the company's future hung in the balance. The mansion's grand dining room buzzed with tension as the board assembled, their tailored suits and polished briefcases a stark contrast to the storm brewing. She was there too, her cleaning cart stationed discreetly in the hallway, tasked with tidying the space. Her presence was barely acknowledged, her uniform rendering her invisible to the executives who saw only power and profit. Thomas descended the staircase, his movements deliberate but unsteady, his left leg dragging slightly. His voice, once commanding, stumbled over greetings, a faint slur tainting his words. She watched from the shadows, her heart pounding as she noted the worsening signs. His left hand trembled, his eyes darted, unfocused. She slipped her notebook from her apron, ready to record, her pen a quiet rebellion against their blindness. The meeting began, but Thomas's performance unraveled. He fumbled a director's name, calling the head of legal, "that finance fellow," his laugh forced and brittle. The board exchanged uneasy glances, their confidence in their leader faltering. Margaret, seated at the table, tried to steer the conversation. "Thomas, perhaps we should discuss your health," she said, her voice measured. His eyes flashed with fury. "My health is fine," he snapped, his words slurring on fine. She moved closer, offering a glass of water, her voice soft. "Sir, please, you should stay hydrated." Thomas whirled on her, his face flushed. "Don't act like you know better than me, African girl," he spat, the words slicing through the room. The directors shifted uncomfortably, their eyes narrowing with suspicion, as if her audacity to speak was a greater offense than Thomas's outburst. One muttered, "A cleaner playing nurse? Unbelievable." The room's tension shattered when Thomas stood to make a point, his voice rising, then stopped. His legs buckled, his body crumpling to the floor with a sickening thud. Gasps filled the air as his face twitched, his left side seizing, his words reduced to incoherent stammers. The board froze, their authority useless in the face of crisis. She acted instantly, rushing forward, her training overriding fear. "Call 911, she shouted, kneeling beside Thomas, checking his pulse with practiced calm. As chaos erupted, she pulled her notebook from her apron, its 47 pages, a lifeline. When paramedics arrived, she thrust it into the lead doctor's hands. "These are his symptoms. Weeks of tremors, memory lapses, slurring. It's neurological, likely a hemorrhage." The doctor scanned the pages, his eyes widening at the precision. "This is remarkable," he muttered, directing his team to prepare for immediate transport. The board stood stunned, their faces a mix of shock and shame. James Carter, the CFO who'd blocked her from Margaret, stared, his smirk gone. They dismissed her warnings, mocked her as Maid Molly, yet her notes were guiding the paramedics' every move. Margaret, pale and trembling, approached her as Thomas was loaded onto a stretcher. "You wrote this?" she asked, her voice breaking. She nodded, her expression steady but her eyes fierce. "I've been watching him. No one else did." The weight of her words hung heavy, a quiet indictment of the room's arrogance. The director's skeptical glances, those that had dismissed her as a meddling cleaner, faltered, replaced by a dawning realization of their error. As the ambulance's sirens wailed into the distance, Margaret clutched the notebook, her fingers trembling as she flipped through its pages. Each entry was a marvel of precision, timestamps, symptoms, observations, all laid out with clinical clarity. 11:47 a.m., misnamed legal director. 11:50 a.m., slurred speech, strategy. Left-hand tremor, severe during outbursts. The notes painted a portrait of a man unraveling, a crisis she tried to ignore. Her nursing training screamed what she now knew. Thomas was facing a brain hemorrhage, and this cleaning woman, this supposed nobody, had seen it when no one else would. She looked up, searching for her, but she'd retreated to the hallway, her card a silent sentinel. The board murmured, their voices tinged with unease, but she stood firm, her oath unbroken. In the quiet that followed, she leaned against her cart, her heart racing. Thomas was on his way to the hospital, his life in the hands of doctors who now held her notebook. But the fight wasn't over. Margaret's stunned expression, the board's shaken silence, these were cracks in the wall of prejudice that had tried to silence her. She'd acted, risking everything, because her oath demanded it. As she pushed her cart down the hall, the notebook's absence felt like a missing limb, but its truth was now in the world. Margaret's eyes, locked on those pages, held a promise of action, of reckoning. The crisis had broken open the truth, and she would not let it be buried again. The crisis had broken open the truth, and she would not let it be buried again. As she stood in the shadowed hallway of the Whitmore mansion, her cleaning cart a silent witness, the echo of ambulance sirens lingered in her ears. Margaret's stunned gaze, locked on the 47-page notebook, was a crack in the fortress of prejudice that had dismissed her as Maid Molly. Her heart raced, not with triumph, but with the weight of a vow kept, a vow to protect life, even for a man who'd scorned her. In the sterile glow of the hospital, where Thomas now fought for survival, her truth was no longer invisible. It was a beacon, illuminating the arrogance that had nearly cost a life, and she stood ready to face whatever came next. In the hospital's ICU, monitors beeped steadily as Thomas lay tethered to tubes, his face pale but alive. The neurosurgeon's diagnosis was unequivocal, a slow brain hemorrhage, exactly as her notebook had suggested. Without the emergency surgery, prompted by her meticulous records, he would have died within days. Margaret sat by his bedside, her fingers still clutching the notebook, its pages worn but resolute. Each entry, timestamps, tremors, slurred speech, was a lifeline, a testament to a woman she'd never truly seen. When Thomas stirred, his eyes heavy with sedatives, his first words were a hoarse whisper. "The cleaning woman. Where is she?" Margaret, her voice trembling, gestured to the hallway where she waited, having lingered for hours, her uniform a stark contrast to the sterile white walls. She entered the room, her steps measured, her eyes meeting Thomas's with unflinching clarity. His gaze faltered, weighed by shame. "You saved me," he said, tears spilling down his cheeks. "I didn't deserve it." Her response was steady, cutting through the silence. "I didn't save you for you. I saved you because I swore an oath to protect life, no matter who it belongs to." Her words were not cruel but resolute, a reminder of the duty that had driven her through weeks of ridicule. Thomas closed his eyes, the weight of his arrogance laid bare. Margaret, watching, felt a pang of guilt. She'd ignored the signs too, silenced by his pride and her hesitation. The story broke like wildfire across the nation. Headlines screamed, "Black cleaning woman saves Wall Street CEO." News outlets dissected the 47-page notebook, its clinical precision, stunning anchors and medical experts alike. But the real scandal lay in the leaked recordings from Apex Capital's boardroom, captured by a junior staffer's phone. In them, James Carter's voice dripped with disdain, calling her Maid Molly and dismissing her warnings as delusional. Sarah Mitchell's icy tone echoed, suggesting she be fired for overstepping. Internal emails exposed by a whistleblower revealed the board's casual cruelty. "She's just a cleaner. What does she know?" The phrase Maid Molly appeared repeatedly, a shorthand for their belief that her race and role rendered her insights worthless. The public's outrage was swift, flooding social media with calls for accountability, their anger fueled by the stark racism laid bare. Apex Capital reeled as its stock plummeted, shedding hundreds of millions in market value overnight. The board, once untouchable, faced a reckoning. James Carter and Sarah Mitchell were summoned to an emergency meeting, their faces ashen as the recordings played on national news. The board had no choice. Both were terminated for discriminatory conduct, their careers shattered under the weight of their own words. Protesters gathered outside the company's Manhattan headquarters, holding signs that read, "Competence has no color." The scandal wasn't just about a CEO's survival. It was about a system that had dismissed a black woman's brilliance, only to be proven wrong in the most public way. She stood in the hospital hallway, her uniform unchanged, but her presence now undeniable. Nurses passing by nodded with quiet respect, their glances a far cry from the boardroom's sneers. Margaret approached her again, the notebook still in hand. "I didn't know," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't know it was you." Her response was calm but firm. "You weren't supposed to. I did it because it was right." The words carried the weight of her oath, forged in Molly's clinics and tested in the face of prejudice. She'd risked everything, her job, her safety, to honor it, and now the world was watching. Thomas, still weak, decided on that hospital bed. As he faced weeks of recovery, he grappled with the humility his arrogance had long buried. He met with his legal team, his voice shaky but resolute. "Set up a fund," he instructed. $10 million, a scholarship in her name, for minority medical students. The Binta Kuyate Fellowship was born, a lifeline to help her return to medical school and support others like her, whose dreams had been stifled by bias. Apex Capital, under pressure, announced a sweeping overhaul. Diversity training, new hiring policies, and a commitment to inclusion that rippled across corporate America. The company's tarnished image began to shift, its reforms hailed as a model for change, though the scars of its past lingered. She returned to her apartment, the news blaring on her small TV. Her face, once invisible, was now a symbol of resilience. Yet she felt no triumph, only a quiet satisfaction that her oath had held. The world saw her now, but she'd always known who she was. A healer, a scientist, a woman who'd faced down prejudice and won. The Maid Molly taunts, the emails, the boardroom laughter, they'd tried to bury her, but her truth had risen, undeniable. As she opened her notebook, now empty of its original pages, she traced the blank lines, a new chapter waiting. Thomas's survival was her victory, but the real fight was for those who'd come after her, for the dreams she'd help restore. Margaret sat by Thomas's bedside, the notebook still in her hands, its pages a mirror to her failure to act sooner. She read the entries again, marveling at the precision, the care, the humanity of a woman her husband had called invisible. The hospital's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows, but they couldn't dim the truth. A cleaning woman had saved a titan, and her courage had changed everything. As the news continued to ripple, Apex Capital's reforms taking shape, she knew the story was far from over. The world had seen the cost of prejudice, and she had been its catalyst. Her notebook a weapon of truth in a war she'd never chosen to fight. The world had seen the cost of prejudice, and she had been its catalyst. Her notebook a weapon of truth in a war she'd never chosen to fight. As Margaret sat by Thomas's bedside, clutching the pages that had saved him, the hospital's sterile glow seemed to fade before the brilliance of a cleaning woman's resolve. 6 months later, that resolve stood center stage under the bright lights of a national ceremony in Washington, D.C., where the nation gathered to honor a heroine whose courage had rewritten a narrative of dismissal. She stood tall, her presence commanding, her cleaning uniform replaced by a simple dress, but her heart still carried the weight of her oath. The world now knew her name, and the legacy she'd begun was reshaping lives far beyond the walls of Apex Capital. The Grand Hall buzzed with anticipation, its chandeliers casting a warm glow over a crowd of dignitaries, activists, and reporters. At the center of the stage, a glass case held her old cleaning uniform, now enshrined in the National Museum of African American History and Culture. A plaque beside it read, "A symbol of dignity and competence transcending prejudice." The sight stirred her, a reminder of the days when that uniform had been a badge of invisibility, mocked by whispers of "Maid Molly" and sneers of "African girl." Now it was a testament to her triumph, a beacon for those who'd been told their place was beneath notice. The audience rose as she stepped to the podium, their applause a thunderous acknowledgement of her journey. Her voice, clear and unwavering, filled the hall. "I was once invisible," she began, her words cutting through the air with quiet power. "They called me names, Maid Molly, African girl, as if my skin, my job, my origins erased my worth. But I never stopped being who I am, a healer, a protector of life." The crowd leaned forward, captivated, as she recounted the slights she'd endured, not with bitterness, but with a steely resolve. "They thought they could define me by a mop, by my accent, by their prejudice. But dignity doesn't come from their approval. It comes from within." Her words sparked a fire, the audience erupting in applause that echoed for minutes. A wave of recognition for a woman who defied a system designed to silence her. In the front row, Thomas Whitmore sat, his cane resting against his chair, a lingering reminder of the brain hemorrhage that had nearly claimed him. His eyes, once sharp with arrogance, were now soft with tears. He'd come to the ceremony uninvited, driven by a need to witness her moment, to face the man he'd been. Her speech laid bare his smallness, the way he dismissed her, called her invisible, and assumed her knowledge was worthless. Each word she spoke was a mirror, reflecting his past cruelty and her unyielding humanity. He bowed his head, the weight of his transformation heavy, his applause joining the crowd's, a silent plea for forgiveness he knew he hadn't earned. The public's reaction was electric, fueled by a story that had gripped the nation. Her face, once confined to the shadows of Apex Capital's hallways, now adorned newsstands and screens, a symbol of resilience against systemic bias. Commentators dissected the scandal, replaying the leaked recordings where executives had mocked her as Maid, their emails dripping with disdain. What does a cleaner know? The public's outrage hadn't faded. It had grown, sparking debates about race, class, and corporate accountability. Her story wasn't just about saving a CEO. It was about exposing a world that valued titles over truth, skin over skill. Protesters still gathered outside Apex Capital, their signs now joined by tributes. She saw what they couldn't. Her triumph was theirs, a victory for every voice dismissed by prejudice. She continued her speech, her voice rising with conviction. I didn't need their permission to be competent, to be human. I saved a life because it was right. After all, an oath I swore years ago doesn't bend to their scorn. The crowd stood, their ovations shaking the hall, a collective acknowledgement of her power. She didn't speak of revenge, she didn't need to. Her presence, her truth, was a rebuke to every insult, every whispered slur. The Maid taunts, the boardroom laughter, the emails that had tried to bury her, they were dust now, insignificant against the magnitude of her impact. She'd turned their prejudice into a mirror, forcing the world to see its flaws. Beyond the ceremony, her legacy was taking root. The Binta Kuyate Fellowship, funded by Thomas's $10 million donation, had sent her back to medical school, her dream reborn. It also supported dozens of minority students, their aspirations no longer stifled by bias. She'd taken the helm of a new community health center in Harlem, training young doctors in the art of observation, her notebook's precision now a curriculum. Her classes were filled with students who saw her not as a cleaner, but as a mentor, her story a beacon for their paths. Apex Capital, transformed by the scandal, had become a model for diversity, its new policies, mandatory training, equitable hiring, setting a standard for corporate America. The company's stock had stabilized, its reputation salvaged by a commitment to change. But the scars of its past remained a reminder of its impact. Thomas, too, had changed. He'd stepped away from Apex Capital, his health too fragile for its demands. Instead, he poured his wealth into philanthropy, focusing on medical education for underserved communities. The man who'd once called her invisible now worked to amplify voices like hers, his cane a constant reminder of the life she'd saved. He attended her health center's opening, standing quietly in the back, his presence a silent testament to his transformation. He didn't seek her forgiveness. He knew it wasn't his to demand. Instead, he let his actions speak, funding clinics, scholarships, and programs that bore her name. As the ceremony ended, she stepped off the stage, the applause still ringing. Reporters swarmed, but she moved through them with quiet grace, her focus not on fame, but on the work ahead. The uniform in its glass case stood as a monument, not to her suffering, but to her strength. She'd turned prejudice into power, not by destroying those who'd wronged her, but by rising so high their smallness could no longer touch her. The greatest revenge, she'd learned, was not in tearing others down. It was in becoming so great that their biases became irrelevant. As she left the hall, Harlem's streets welcomed her home, where her real work, saving lives, training healers, waited. Her story has left an indelible mark, a testament to courage and humanity triumphing over prejudice. From the shadows of a cleaning cart to the spotlight of a national stage, her journey reminds us that true greatness lies in staying true to one's values, no matter the odds. We hope this tale of resilience and redemption has moved you as much as it has us. Please share your thoughts in the comments. What did her story teach you about overcoming bias or honoring one's purpose? Your reflections fuel our storytelling, and we're grateful for your time and engagement. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire and challenge, and let us know where you're joining us from. Thank you for being part of this journey, and we look forward to meeting you again in our next tale of unsung heroes and unbroken spirits.